Welcome back to the Mythic Dungeon International as we're moving on into the second match of the day between Paint for Femme and Fourty. Joining me on the desk to recap all of this lovely action, we've got Zyronic, Nagura, and 2018's MDI champion, Sarah. Welcome to the desk, Sarah.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. As we're going on into our second series of the day here, we've seen another EU versus EU matchup here. Nagura, as we're looking into this one, Fourty definitely looking to seal their BlizzCon spot on this one, but as we mentioned, Paint for Femme wants to be able to pull some upsets today, and they want to be able to show how deep they can make a run in this series.
Yeah, this is really important for Fourty as they had some difficulties in the Australia LAN, in the Spring LAN, because they didn't manage to get one of their members down there, so they had some troubles there. So it's very important for them to get those points to be able to qualify for BlizzCon. But yeah, you know, Paint for Femme saying they're super confident they can beat any team, basically. So it's going to be interesting to see this matchup, especially because in the time trials, they were only 1 minute apart. If you add all the times together, just 1 minute apart.
Yeah, let's take a look at those time trials now that you mention it onto that one and how important it is to kind of get a look at how these teams are stacking up against each other. So, as you mentioned, just over a minute or two difference onto that one. So not very heavy in terms of the differentials between the total of those three dungeons. And if we go into game 3, then we will end up seeing that freehold. But when we're looking at the first map of the day here, Zyronic, we're going to have Dagor between these guys, and it's going to be a little bit more focused on the Void emissaries. That's the stack that we have going into this one.
There's a couple things that I'm particularly looking at in this Dagor here. It's explosive, which we saw quite a bit last season. We saw it in the very first West Cup last season, as well as I believe the third East Cup, and at LAN. So these teams, especially Fourty, they're pretty practiced on explosive Dagor. The one change to Dagor that I'm looking at, though, is absolutely the cannons. They only have 5 shots with each cannon to take care of that mob count. So I think we're going to see a completely different strategy from these teams, because in the last strategies we saw in the MDI, they got rid of 80% of their mob count using those cannons. So we're going to have to either see them pull the entire dungeon there all at once, or they're going to have to figure out where they're getting mob count earlier on in the dungeon.
You think, Sarah, that we're going to have any large crab pulls or anything like that in the docks or in the beaches early on into that? Or do you think it's going to be, like Zyronic mentioned, they're going to have to find some magical way to get an insane amount of trash killed with only 5 shots?
Yeah, with the amount of practice time that they've had, I don't think they're going to be trying to I don't think they're going to do anything new. I think they're probably going to be looking to maximize those cannons, see what they can do with them. As we say, it's only 5 shots per cannon, so they do have 15 shots. I don't think we'll see stuff at the beginning, but you never know. Maybe they'll surprise us with something new.
Yeah, I think that'll be interesting to start seeing what kind of surprises come around, because we've seen teams practice up on their time trials, but so much on practice, you mentioned it before, Zyronic, it was like when we moved on to a Wednesday, Thursday, all the streams just cut off.
Yeah, that was interesting. I'm in one of the streamers' Discord. I believe it's now, and he specifically mentioned that they were okay with time trials, but when they actually got to the tournament practice, when they got to like the non-top 3 dungeons, they're like, oh, we give away way too much. And honestly, for a viewer experience for MDI, it's going to be more experience to have like all the teams doing different routes for most of the dungeons. So I'm kind of okay with it.
Yeah, me too. It's very interesting to see those different, if every team just does the same thing, because let's say Method U found something and they're shown it on stream, then every other team like, you know what, we're just going to do the same thing. So definitely interesting to see that they're not streaming this, then maybe we see some varieties coming out of the teams.
Well, that'll be a really interesting point as well. So the rogue nerfs, for example, had already been announced, but they don't go live until Tuesday with the reset, or Wednesday for EU. So in that same vein, it kind of causes a little bit of panic for these guys when they're able to start looking at, okay, well, what are we going to have to change? And it starts pushing them, I think, in a little bit of ways, Sarah, towards, all right, now's the time for us to innovate, because it's a whole new world for everybody all at once.
Yeah, definitely. I think we'll see some new classes coming in the coming weeks. For now, it is going to be mainly rogue-dominated, unfortunately. But teams like Paint for Femme, they're already looking to innovate. They're looking to bring in DKs, things like that. Maybe some Warlock play, but we'll just have to see how that plays out.
We'll see, as Fourty certainly has the favor of Twitch chat here with that 71%. Let's see if Paint for Femme is going to be able to go toe-to-toe as we go on into Dagor.
Oh my god, it's a Windwalker! Can you imagine? The first time we see the Windwalker here coming out in this summer season, not running a triple rogue here for Paint for Femme. They were actually the one team that were playing the Windwalker throughout all of the time trial dungeons, while Fourty actually, it was a team that was very, very diverse in time trials. They were playing a DK in one of the dungeons, they were playing Mistweaver in one of the dungeons, and they were playing Windwalker in another dungeon. So Fourty definitely has some class diversity up their sleeves. Unfortunately, not pulling it out in this Dagor though here.
Not only the first Windwalker, but the first non-rogue DPS out of any of the matches so far. We are still pretty early on, so that's not that big of a deal. But right away we see completely different pulls coming out of these teams. Paint for Femme's doing a big pull with their Bloodlust. But 40k did pretty much the same size pull with the boss and also committed their Bloodlust. And even though this is fortified, the boss damage doesn't matter too much. I mean, they're already halfway through the boss. They had, big advantage right off the bat for 40k.
Yeah, we see Ricky here drop very low here. I assume it was the upheaval that he didn't manage to dodge. But, Pain for Fam dealing with this trash here on top of dealing with the boss at the same time. You see all those explosives spawn, but we know that rogues can deal with those explosives very well, especially outlaw rogues, so that shouldn't be a big deal as long as they have designed properly. But you see Ricky dropping just so low from this trash pull here on Pain for Fam's side.
Yeah, and going into the affixes again, the explosive affix we've seen so many times in Toldagor, I feel like the team's coming back to the tournament. And even Pain for Fim, when Shelly and Fim both played in the first cup last time around, so they're also pretty familiar with the explosive affix in this Toldagor. Both of these teams have a lot of experience with it, so I don't foresee there being too many problems unless they get overloaded with explosives. But they're definitely going to have to pull trash in places that they weren't used to doing it before purely because of that cannon change. So we might see some explosive mishaps somewhere in the middle of the dungeon where they're pulling extra trash, which we haven't seen from any of these teams before.
Yeah, and there's a risk coming out with this cannon part now because they only have those 5 shots. And let's assume that one of the teams calculated to get, let's say, 40% with those 5 shots, but then they miss one of the shots or it doesn't work as planned, then they all of a sudden have to go and backtrack and do something else or have to deal with it themselves. And we all know that this trash in the cannon part is very difficult to deal with, especially if you have a full melee comp, just because there's so many difficult things going on around the minions. So if you don't get those cannon shots out, it can definitely cause disaster for those teams.
Now, something, of course, important to mention is all of these dungeons we're running on the tournament realm are different sets of beguiling. You can have one of the 3 emissary styles be... you can have more of those spawn. I can have a preference for that. And in this Toldagor, we do have the Void Emissary be like the more preferred thing to spawn. So we're going to see more of those Void Emissaries in this dungeon. And in this close encounter dungeon, where everything's close up and there's, the hallways are tiny, Void can be a problem if it's not in a good place for it.
It can definitely be a problem, but also on smaller areas it will also be easier to find a spot to line of sight usually. As you can see, one of the Void Emissaries here on 40k side is around the corner, so they managed to just pull all of those crocodiles back around the corner, not having to deal with the cast from the Void Emissary at all. And we also know that this Void Emissary is stationary, so will not move. So what most of those teams are probably going to do is just walk past it once they dealt with all the trash mobs and then just shadow melt or vanish the aggro off of it so they don't have to deal with it at all.
Yeah, pretty much the same thing we saw them doing with Reaping Packs in the previous season. So not too much has changed in terms of racial comps. People are still using Night Elf for most things for that shadow melt like you mentioned. But, also rogues can be running Dwarf for to be able to remove debuffs as well, because they're, like you mentioned, also just able to vanish off that aggro as well. So we were actually showing the racials in like the pre-match lineup instead of the class, because obviously they're playing rogue, not we're showing outlaw. We don't need to see that they're also rogue, so that's something to look for as well, in the coming weeks and also in the matches later today. But 40k is pretty far ahead at this point in the dungeon. They're also doing massive pulls here as well. I believe they pulled the entire second floor.
Yeah, they did. It's very, because their strategies, Pain for Fam compared to 40k, is completely different. And this is what we really like to see because of this huge change that happened in Toldagor. We see Rentari actually going down here. The Battle Rush coming out of Resto immediately, so hopefully they can recover this pull. But definitely a huge mistake here by 40k's side. As Pain for Fam, in opposite to 40k, they chose to skip a lot of this trash in the first area here, which it's very similar to most of the strategies that happened in the first season, because the trash is so dangerous to deal with, and they go straight up to the Just Howless area, while 40k just dealt with all of this trash, and they're now 7% ahead in trash count.
Yeah, part of the reason I like seeing these party frames on the monitor now is we also saw that the second the tank died, all 3 rogues popped their riposte at the exact same time, giving them a 100% parry chance. All the mobs are pretty low. I don't know if they had to commit the battle res there. They probably could have gotten through that pull without them, albeit, a little bit more dangerously if that defensive cooldown was running out. That might bite them later if they don't have that battle res available, but, they should get one more battle res before they get to the final encounter, which is usually where teams have a problem, so it shouldn't be that big of a deal.
Yeah, definitely. We also see, of course, bursting. We haven't mentioned it yet. As we can see on 40k side, it's causing huge problems here because bursting, of course, is an affix that if you don't deal with it very well, it can immediately wipe your group. And there's nothing the healer can do, especially Resto Druids. They don't have huge cooldowns for the group. They don't have any DRs, group DRs or absorbs for the group. No big group cooldowns for them except Tranquility. So if you have a debuff that is about to run out and then a mob dies and it keeps rolling, the Druid can definitely struggle to keep the group up, especially if there's no Tranquility available to him. So they definitely gotta watch out for that. But both of the teams have been doing a good job so far, except of course this one death that happened for Antari earlier.
Yeah, Ricky is absolutely popping off on Jess Howlis for Pain for Fem here, showing the strength of the Windwalker Rogue, so used to Rogues, Windwalker Monk for that team. I mean, Windwalker's still a very good class to run. It just doesn't quite have the utility of triple Rogue, for most dungeons. But it might be a comfort pick, or it might just be what they're comfortable playing in this dungeon. Ring of Peace is very useful in general for knocking mobs back, especially for the Tides emissaries. So that might be something they play for one of the packs here.
Yeah, Ricky is known to be a main Windwalker monk. He played Windwalker even before this whole meta in the spring season established. So he definitely was one of the monks who, basically said, guys, monk is actually really good. We should start playing monk. So Ricky, one of the inventors or almost like trendsetters when it comes to those Windwalkers, and therefore he's the one just sticking to the Windwalker here and not switching to the Rogue. And it pays off for them, as you can see in the damage meter, because he's just doing so much damage. And one thing, of course, that we probably didn't forget about is that Windwalker also applies the 5% physical buff to everyone else. So not only is his damage that matters, but also he increases everyone else's damage in the group.
Now, looking at the damage meters for this fight for Jess Howlis, this is something I learned from Method Innate. You do have to kill Jess Howlis to finish the encounter, but the real winner is whichever DPS does the most damage to Bobby, because that's just bragging rights, right? You want to kill the boss as quickly as possible, but if you can also do damage to Bobby, you're an owner
they
DPS.
Got a fear.
I mean, yeah, they got a fear, and Shelly also went down for it too. Fortunately, Jess is dead, so they do unlock that checkpoint. He can just release here whenever Bobby drops combat. But that's 5 seconds on the board, plus they have to wait for him to release.
Yeah, they maybe did a little bit too much damage to Bobby here for those bragging rights, as they got a fear off, and Shelly and Mabel actually getting feared. Only Shelly going down in the end, so it wasn't a huge problem as the boss was already really low. But they definitely have to make sure they watch out for those kind of things later on, as they already had one death. They still have a battle rest available to them, but if the rest of the Druid goes down, of course they can't get him back up. So they gotta be careful. One thing to note, they only have 33% trash as they get to this cannon area, which is not that much more than what we have seen the last time around. So they have to play really well here with those 5 charges of each cannon to make sure to get the trash.
Yeah, and the big thing here is it looks like they're clearing up the bridge first. They're AoEing it down with his Void Touched Emissary, because you still do take damage in the cannon. So if someone was in that cannon taking shots, they would still get hit by that Queen's Decree hide cast that the Void Touched Emissary does. So it looks like they're clearing all of this out first, and then they're probably going to gear up to do some massive pull and try to AoE it down with just those 5 cannon shots. Yeah,
now we will see if this is actually worth it, the strategy that Pain for Fam is doing compared to 40k. 40k definitely is doing a lot more trash in the downstairs area without the cannons, while Pain for Fam still choosing to do this other strategy, the cannon strategy, where you just, put a lot of your, a lot of emphasis on the cannon part. Now, if it's not working out for Pain for Fem and they're missing some of the cannon shots, it can be a disaster, as I mentioned earlier. So all eyes on Pain for Fem, just checking out how they deal with those cannons.
Yeah, and I mean they're gearing up here. They're refood buffing for Shelly. They're making sure they're healing to full to get off that like you mentioned that bursting affix earlier. And I'm interested to see exactly what they plan on doing here, moving the barrel so that the AoE doesn't hit them here as well into a very specific spot. We see them moving into that 3rd floor, pulling a bunch of the trash with them as well. I just want to see how big this pull is going to be.
Yeah.
By the way, if you guys are curious in the stream, you can actually watch the individual views of both of these teams. If you click on that squad mode button on the top right, you can check out the full screen of each of these teams if you're more focused on just what one of the teams is doing as well.
Yeah, one more thing to mention here is that, of course, you also have those emissaries in this whole cannon part, and the emissaries don't actually get damaged by the cannon shot, so they have to deal with them without the cannons, which is one thing to note. And as you mentioned earlier, if you're inside the cannon, you're not immune to damage, so you can get the damage from the Void Emissary inside there, and you also get the damage from Explosive and Bursting, as we mentioned before. Bursting and Explosive are 2 very difficult affixes to deal with in this area, because if you're in a cannon, you can't just, you can go out and use Cloak, for example, if you're one of the rogues, but it's not going to last forever, right? So you only have this one time where you can use your big defensives to be able to survive it, but then you're out.
I feel bad. We should have been counting how many cannon shots they've used.
Yeah.
I'm almost certain they haven't used all 5 shots on either of their cannons yet, and I feel bad that we haven't been counting. They definitely have shots left in that first cannon. The thing to remember is they also have the second cannon further on this bridge and the third cannon before the final boss as well. So there's quite a bit that they're going to do. I believe the third cannon's probably just going to be used for all of that trash between the third and fourth bosses, but these 2 cannons are going to be where they're going to like really make sure they use their efficiency, make sure they're hitting as many mobs as possible to get this dungeon down quickly.
Yeah, you never really know about this very last cannon that, I mean, in the past it hasn't been used that much, but just because the cannons before have unlimited shots, right? So there's no point in using the last one that much. But maybe now with this cannon change, they actually choose to pull some of the trash into this last cannon area and nuke it down there. And you see on Pain for Fem's side, Femclad is actually, he went inside the area and just backtracked to get some of this trash back up, and now they're gathering it up because, again, there's only 5 shots, so they need to make sure everything is on one spot first before they start shooting.
And we did see right there with that perfect camera angle, by the way, that they missed the first shot on those front 2 officers. So those do have a little bit more HP. If they have 1 shot left, that'll finish everything else off, but I don't see anyone inside that cannon right now. Maybe they're waiting for the explosives. There are a lot of explosives there that they all line of sighted. But they're just going to have to finish off these mobs at 20% HP, and, you know, not missing a couple of those mobs with one of those shots, that makes all the difference here. And they have to kill all these mobs at pretty much the same time, and they're going to get a bunch of bursting stacks. This is kind of dangerous for healing here. They just completely stopped the DPS to make sure those bursting stacks fell off.
Yeah, this seems... Okay, so on theory, on paper, it seems like a good idea to be able to kill so much trash at the same time. If you just gather it all up, put it on one spot, and then use your 5 cannon shots to make sure you deal with this trash, and you get so much percentage all at once. But because the setup time just takes so long, as you can see, Pain for Fem just now got done with this trash. It took them forever to gather them up properly, to have the shot to stop damage, to get the bursting drop off on everyone. Well, 40k on the other side, they got to this kind of part way later, but because they don't have to deal with so much trash here, they just like, it takes them way less time to go through this area. So it almost seems like 40k is way more efficient just because Pain for Fem is losing so much time on having to set up this whole cannon part.
This is an interesting pull. Pull both of the offenses into Knight Captain Valeri with Bloodlust. I mean, this is a boss that we've never seen teams use Bloodlust on before, just purely because of how difficult the final boss in this counter is compared to this boss. But this makes sense because Knight Captain Valeri doesn't really do much. It's kind of, you know, this is a bad way of putting it, it's kind of a solved boss. The mechanics all happen cyclically. It's really easy to make sure you're doing everything perfectly. We just see Lazo go down, which is kind of weird on this boss, but that might have just been because of the officers. And I feel like with 2 rogues, you can stun every single one of the officers' riot shields as well. I like this a lot. This is just really efficient in terms of cleave.
Yeah, I definitely like this too, especially because we're in a fortified setting, and I believe in the whole of the summer season, this dungeon was played on Tyrannical, and therefore the last boss was so difficult. They all saved the Bloodlust for it, but now in a fortified setting, it's not going to be as hard anymore, so therefore they don't necessarily need to save their Bloodlust, and they can use it for trash plus boss here, and just get the Bloodlust on trash plus boss at the same time. Just having such an efficient Bloodlust usage for damage, for time of the dungeon, not for difficulty, but we've seen Pain for Fem now having the exact same trash percentage on the other side of your screen. So both of them on 88%, 1 death for Pain for Fem, while 2 deaths on 40k side. Now, still 30% behind on boss HP, but again, it's fortified, so it's not actually that much HP to go through.
Yeah, and you know, as much as I say I liked that pull before, it looks like they put them behind, because Pain for Fem was dealing with that second cannon trash a lot more efficiently than 40k did. They caught up a lot here, and they also have their Bloodlust available for Korgus, but this is kind of going to seal the deal. 40k just full wiping one. I didn't miss with that wipe too.
I think it was the explosion from one of the...
Man.
They were just not standing far enough to the side. I'm not completely sure if it was covering the whole area and there was no space to go outside, or if they were just not stepping all the way down to the corner of the room. But definitely this... I mean, it's almost for sure going to be a ripe, right? We only have 2 rogues left. They do have defensives, but... and this boss really doesn't melee for a lot of damage, and he casts a lot, so maybe they can finish it off, but it's going to be very difficult for 40k. And Pain for Fem on the other side, they're about to down the boss, and they were behind. So now we only have Lofus left, the boss still on 6%. There's going to be no way that he's going to be able to finish up this boss by himself.
Yeah, he doesn't have riposte available. The boss would have to do just nothing but cast here, and he's just going to die. No cheat death available. 10%, 1 more melee is going to kill him, and there he goes down. That's really unfortunate for them. But something I was going to mention before that is they had already, you know, kind of put themselves behind by doing that pull. We talked about it while they were doing it. This looks great. This looks really efficient. But the problem with that pull, in my opinion, is that you couldn't really take advantage of your healer DPS there. The healer was more focusing on healing the tank rather than doing anything else. And you could tell on the damage meters that Miwa was doing 22k single target DPS. On a Resto Druid, he was doing more than the tank. And Igloo was only doing like 14k on 3 targets. I mean, there's got to be some, you know, pulling multiple mobs together is definitely like an efficiency thing, but I don't know if it was the right move there.
Okay, so one thing to note as well is that Pain for Femme had to backtrack all the way. They were down with the boss, they went all the way back to make sure to deal with this Marine and this Emissary of Tides. This can't be planned by them because this is such a big time waste. They probably, something went wrong when they were doing the cannon area. Maybe the Marine didn't come with the pull, and therefore they had to backtrack here. But they definitely something messed up, and they had to backtrack a lot. So losing so much time here for Pain for Femme. Now, if we think about 40k, if they wouldn't have wiped here, 40k would have been so far ahead just because of this whole backtracking that Pain for Femme had to do here. But because of the wipe, they just now again engaging Valeri on 80%, and Pain for Femme, they're on their way to the last boss here.
Yeah, something to mention as well, and we always mention this for the Cups, is that this is being live streamed on a very low delay. These teams are allowed to have the stream on their other monitor. They can kind of, you know, keep tabs on what the other teams are doing. And I guarantee you that was like a call for Pain for Femme. It was like, oh, they wiped on Valeri. We have time to go take care of this right now. Let's just play safe and go do it now.
Yeah, I mean, in the end, they would have need to do it anyway, right? Because as you can see here, in the very last area of Toldagor, there's nothing left. So once you're done with the last boss and once you kill this trash, there's no like side trash that you can pull to get the last few percentages like in some other dungeons. You have to backtrack anyway. But of course, Pain for Femme just so far ahead as they get the 100% now, so they definitely, it was worth it to go back to get this last percentage here. Ricky dropping really low from one of those Void Emissaries, getting a cast off, but should be able to heal him up here before they pull the last boss here, Overseer Korgus. And we talked about this boss so much the last season because, you know, it's such a difficult boss to deal with on a tyrannical setting, but on 45 it should be not a problem for them to deal with unless they get really unlucky and get a million doubles in a row.
And like we mentioned also, they have their bloodlust for this boss, so even then they're mitigating their chances of getting those doubles by just, you know, burning the boss down as quickly as possible. They'll probably have the boss at 50% when the bloodlust is gone, and there's not going to be that much RNG left in the fight at that point. You know, I believe even if they got 3 doubles in a row at that point, they have enough personal cooldowns and healing throughput with the overall character strength right now to where they should be totally fine.
Yeah, probably. I believe so as well. As you can see, Mabel here, not only healing, but he's also just switching in and out of platforms to be able to do some damage as well, as he does 22k DPS here, single target on this boss. So a lot of DPS coming out of the healer here. And 40k, they're down with the boss now, as far as I can tell, yeah, but still, you know, they have to deal with the trash, have to get to the last boss. It's very, very unfortunate for them. And we talked about 40k before. 40k, this is so important. They need to get those points to be able to qualify for a BlizzCon. So definitely a huge mistake by them, and they need to rethink what they're going to do. They need to get their head into the game.
Everyone's sitting down at the desk here, but I don't want to say it's over just yet. We've seen teams wipe lower than this before. I remember East
true.
Cup 2 last year. We had some mishaps in this dungeon. Things can still go wrong here. The boss is at 10%. This should be Pain for Femme's dungeon, but Ricky does go down. Fortunately, if the battle is available for him, so it shouldn't be that big of a deal. But we do have the boss going down for Pain for Femme, and they take a, you know, relatively clean first dungeon off of 40k here.
Right, you are, as Pain for Femme takes that game 1, and 40k there. Unfortunately, having that wipe onto that third boss just bogged them down so much, and having that wipe down there at 4 or 5%, just absolutely crushing going into it. But looking at the rest of the matchup there, it was cool to start seeing, Zero, as we were looking at how they're routing, they're actually taking some of the crabs early on and building towards some larger pulls. And it seems like we're still kind of in that experimentation phase as to what they want to do with the cannons and how big they can pull.
Yep, exactly. Like I said before, I wasn't really sure what they were going to do with the crabs, but you see 40k at the beginning here, they do decide to pull 2 crab packs. They do the croc as well. They have to be very careful with this crocodile. The chomp reducing the tank's maximum HP by 5% can be very deadly. We move into Pain for Femme here. They were a little bit behind coming out of that 40k pull. They do pull a large amount of trash with the boss. Ricky absolutely popping off on this boss here. Does a large amount of damage. They kind of make up the time there that they lost on the first boss. The cannons, this was the bit that I was really interested in seeing. two relatively different strats. We see Pain for Femme here. They actually held this cannon for a very long time. They didn't use it instantly. They went back in, they got a large amount of trash, they killed it without cannons, and they brought another pack out and used the first cannon on that. Didn't really use the last cannon that much. This was the moment that 40k, I don't want to say they gave the game away, but they did kind of give the game away a little bit. They were just, yeah, it was unfortunate for them. They tried to make a little smart play running into the corners. They didn't see the cannons with the little barrels even were there, and unfortunately that did kill them. And then Paint for Femme here coming in at the end. They kill this boss in a very timely manner, and they do take the game.
Yeah, right there, seeing onto that third boss, onto that Knight Captain was just actually horrifying, because we've seen so many times about, it's important to make sure you're grabbing the barrels, making sure you're staying on top of these kind of things, and all too often it's just that simple little mechanic Dagor that could just absolutely destroy your team's chances of winning.
Yeah, definitely, especially if you want to min-max your DPS, of course. Also, as a healer and as a tank, you want to do as much single target damage as possible. But we've talked about, because they were pulling the trash on top of this boss, and maybe it's really not something they should have done, because it distracted them, obviously, and they were not moving those barrels as they should have. And there we go, just the room is full of the explosions. There's no space to survive, and there we go.
I don't want to say I caster cursed them, because I did say the boss was kind of figured out going into it. That's a very weird wipe from a team that, they're veterans. They were here since last season. They know what they're doing. So I feel like that was very out of character for them, and I hope it doesn't affect them too much going into the next match.
Yeah, definitely not, as the next match would be Underrot coming up. So on the other side of this break, we'll see Game 2 between Pain for Femme and 40k. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Mythic Dungeon International, as Pain for Femme is up 1 against 40k as we're going on into the Underrot here. And as we mentioned, it's ironic, there's a lot of Tides emissaries in this dungeon as we're looking at a fortified, raging scenario here. And we'll be interested to start seeing how these times are going to match up against the first series we were seeing earlier with Abra.
Yeah, the thing I'm looking for here right now, this is the first cup, right? All these teams are going to have differing strategies coming in. I want to see, if there's a faster thing that these teams can do versus what Abracadabra did. Abracadabra's strat looked really good, but like I mentioned, it's the early cup. People haven't had time to copy strategies, especially with no teams, streaming their practice.
Yeah, in many ways, it kind of seemed like Pain for Femme and 40k also didn't have quite the optimization that we would want to be able to see later on, for example, Sierra, especially with cannons coming up. So kind of curious to see how Underrot will go, since there hasn't been a lot of changes in terms of mob count or mob type that they have to deal with in the same way that like cannons, for example, were a really big deal when they were changed.
Definitely. The big thing they're going to have to be looking at here is how they deal with these emissaries, how they deal with beguiling. That's the really big change here. We did see a difference in, I think it was about a minute compared to how they were dealing with reaping last season, about a minute faster. I reckon Pain for Femme, I reckon they can get a good time. I reckon they can match Abra's 1620. I think if they put enough work in, I think they could.
Ricky went
Ricky!
Oh, he was my only hope. Oh, well.
We'll be having words with him later on.
Oh, yeah.
Words with them. I mean, the Nerf bat will be having words with him a little bit later on when that reset starts rolling around. As we're going on, this is Game 2 coming up right now. Pain for Femme really wants to be able to seal this 2-0 and move on quickly as possible. But 40k, they're down right now, but they're not out just yet.
Yeah, 40k, I mean, like we mentioned there a little earlier, 40k, they're veterans. They've been doing this for a long time, especially some of those Raiders and Fat Shark. Yes, they've been playing this game at a high level for a very long time, and I don't expect that one small mistake like that's really going to tilt these guys. But we kind of mislabeled them as tilters last season. They definitely aren't that. Like, they're definitely very seasoned players, so I'd like to see them just come out with a very clean run here. Yeah,
and also, it's actually interesting to see that Ricky is switching to this rogue in this dungeon, because we talked about this earlier. In this dungeon, there's a lot of disease dispel that can be in your favor. So switching the monk away, just not having the disease dispel, that must mean that rogues are just so important in this dungeon, probably just because they have so much single target control on all of these mobs that need to be interrupted in this Underrot here.
Yeah, and right off the bat already, we see 40k going for a slightly different pull than Pain for Femme, like we mentioned there. These teams just have differing strategies. There's been no consolidation of strategies like there was last season, where everyone kind of watched Team D's Waycrest Manor or some method to use better dungeons and just kind of said, that strat's awesome, we're just going to copy that 100%. It's the start of the season. Everyone's running different strats because nobody's seen what everyone else has done yet. So we'll just have to see who's better. And right now, 40k is one mob count up, and they're already on the boss.
Yeah, I'm actually really excited to see what's going to happen, especially since we're going to see a rogue nerf coming in early next week. So we're probably not going to see those triple rogues anymore next time around. And it's going to be interesting to see how they switch up their cons. Is there going to be a Windwalker, or do people even, figure things out differently? Just have more Vengeance Demon Hunters coming in, or maybe even Havoc Demon Hunters. We'll see what those teams do. And as you mentioned, things haven't been figured out yet. None of those teams really know exactly what the best comp is and what the best strategy is. So definitely interesting to see an Underrot again, as we have seen it already before by Abra and Syzygy. So we're going to see the differences in strategy between those four teams, rather.
And kind of to go further later on that as well, one of our teams later in the Dungeon, I think next match actually, Fly Me Out, they're running a Holy Paladin. In Time Trials, they ran Hunter and Mage, so we're definitely going to see some other classes other than Rogue come out here, and we'll be able to actually kind of weigh what those classes do versus rogues. Because I feel like this patch, with all the new essences implemented, with all the new gear, there's a whole bunch of fun gear this time around that kind of changes how classes work. I mean, we're seeing healers do 22 DPS because they have damage proc trinkets now like they had at the end of Legion. So we're seeing a lot of different, diversity in terms of gear, not necessarily specs right now, but the gear changes kind of change how the game works a little bit.
Yeah, and you can also see essences, of course. You can be a little bit more aggressive and go with damage affixes for essences, if you're a healer, or you can also go with damage if you're a tank, compared to going a little bit more defensive and going with defensive essences. Same for the healers as well. So we'll see interesting combinations of essences and tier from those teams coming out later on as well. And on 17, the level 17, it actually seems like those teams not actually struggling that much on this level here. Of course, the gear set is set to 445, so it is pretty high item level for those teams. So yeah, it seems like they're doing a good job dealing with those level 17s.
Yeah, maybe just a little bit too easy for him. Maybe it needs to be a little harder. We'll see. We'll see coming up. But yeah, I mean, 40k is definitely getting further in the dungeon quickly. They're getting to this sort of, insane trash room with all these Tides emissaries, and we didn't really see too much trouble with it earlier. Maybe a couple spot deaths for Syzygy, but this is a dangerous room. These fixates, and we keep mentioning it every single time we're on this Underrot, these fixates do shadow damage. They do a lot of damage from the Feral Bloodstormers. That's something to look out for. On top of that, the Tides emissaries make it so you can't CC any mobs, so you just have to eat the melees to the face until the Tides emissary is gone. So there's a lot of damage going on in the group. So you see Lazzle dropped incredibly low with that fixate. Fortunately, didn't proc his cheat death just yet, but this is just incredibly dangerous.
Yeah, actually, I really like this pull if they're going to manage to pull it off, because it is very dangerous, as you said. But this pull, they actually pulled two Tide emissaries on top of each other. You see the Lasher here in the back actually being blinded, because you do not want to have a Lasher on top of Tide emissaries, because you cannot interrupt them. And therefore, they did see those and pulled all the mobs that don't necessarily need to be interrupted on top of two Tide emissaries. So very, very efficient compared to what we've seen from Abracadabra before, where they had to single target one of the Tide emissaries down because they didn't really have any other mobs to pull on top with. So definitely like this strategy here coming out of 40k.
I learned from AWC BlizzCon champion Trill that's blound. I like that word, even if it's not a real word. I'm going to call that blound from here on out. Yeah, like you mentioned, they pulled both of the Tides emissaries, right? And once those are gone, this room gets a lot easier. It's just pretty much the same to deal with as it was last season. All you got to do is just get all the interrupts. And fortunately, they have 4 melee classes, all with very low cooldown kicks, which makes that pretty easy.
One thing to mention is, though, that the affixes in this dungeon are probably one of the most difficult out of all the dungeons for this cup, because we see Necrotic and Raging on top of having Fortified as well. So definitely very difficult on the tank, because you have all those Necrotic stacks, and then you have all the mobs Raging as well once they drop low. That's why you see those tanks just start kiting, as you see for Pain for Fem here. Fem just running around, making sure he's not getting hit by all those mobs because they are Raging. And you also want to make sure that you drop off this Necrotic as well. So some of the tanks are actually choose to run Dwarf here in this dungeon, so they don't have the Night Elf available to them. So they have some clever mechanics to make sure they skip the trash anyway, just not needing the Shadow Melt, just because Necrotic is such a difficult affix to deal with, and Dwarf having the racial removing it makes it so much easier.
Clever use of game mechanics, you say. Interesting. I mean, wow, okay, I was going to say they have a little bit of trash to deal with before they get in the boss, but they're just getting right into it. They're pulling the rest of this trash pack. Well, not quite. They have 1 Bloodstormer left, which is probably a smart play. 2 Bloodstormers on the group is a lot of residual damage on two random players in the group, or just 1 player could get both fixates. That'd be miserable for them. But this is something we didn't see that much last season because, well, that was more of an affix thing, right? With Reaping typically you didn't want to go trash back into Reaping while you were on a boss that did as much AoE damage as Kragmaw does, especially in this fortified setting. That trash will do a lot of damage in this room. But I like this. I mean, with no Reaping to worry about, you can kind of just AoE the trash down with the boss, and they did focus the Bloodstormer first as well, so most of the residual AoE damage from the group is gone.
Yeah, it's still dangerous though, of course, because as I mentioned, this necrotic on Ventari, you can see the stacks are just ramping up here on top of having to deal with the boss as well. And then we'll see the Tantrum coming out, just dropping everybody so low. But Ventari doing a very good job surviving all this damage here from the raging mobs, necrotic, and the boss at the same time. So I really like this pull by Fourty doing such a good job. Now, Pain for Femme, they are on the boss as well now. They do have more trash percentage, so the way that they pulled the boss a little bit later doesn't mean as much. It doesn't mean that they're behind, just because they do have 10% more trash. And on a fortified setting, that means quite a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely pretty close right now, right? The 25% boss HP versus the 10% trash is, I'd say it's a little bit in favor of Pain for Femme, like you mentioned. The thing to mention on the side of 40k is they still have one of those Bloodstormers to deal with. And those are probably the worst mob in this room in general. So interested to see if they're going to just sap that and move by it, or if they're going to actually pull it with the next trash pack, which would be kind of... I don't think we've ever seen somebody pull a Bloodstormer into the next trash pack.
Not really. That seems very dangerous, especially with those affixes. But 40k dealing with this Tantrum here, and you can see the Bloodstormer here in the corner. No one really wants to go there. We see a blind coming out there just to be sure to not aggro this mob on top of the boss, because that would definitely would not be something you want to, on top of having Kragmaw as well. But yeah, 40k doing a really good job here. Now, one thing to mention about Kragmaw, which some people don't really know about, is that he has a random RNG cast sequence in between those tantrums, meaning that if he does a charge first, then he will actually do 2 charges and 1 indigestion. If he does the indigestions first, then he will only do 1 charge, meaning that if you get the charge first, you will have a little bit more time to DPS the boss in between the tantrums, and that's definitely what you want.
Okay, so pull the Bloodstormer, and they're trixing the rest of the trash to the tanks, so they're not gonna pull it into the room, so they'll have a little bit more room to kite around that Bloodstormer. So, I mean, this is just a little bit of extra damage on whichever person is fixated. You see Wolf Disco has the fixate here, and every single time he gets meleeed, he's taking, you know, about 40% of his HP. Fortunately, he has that riposte up, so he's not taking too much damage anymore, but still, you know, it's still pretty nasty.
Definitely, and I feel like, okay, so when I'm healing Underrot and a rogue has this fixate, I feel like it's one of the classes that gets the most damage if they don't have riposte or any of the other defensives available to them, because, I mean, yeah, Cloak makes sure they don't get hit by the shadow damage, but they also do physical damage at the same time. Those Bloodstormers, they do both physical and shadow damage, so none of the rogues' abilities really make sure that they you don't get any damage by the Bloodstormers, so definitely not something you want to pull on top of a very difficult pack. And if you choose to do so, you definitely want to have a lot of healing or a lot of CC coming out onto those Bloodstormers. We see a Guardian spawning here, so they didn't interrupt one of the raised death by the death speakers on 40k's side.
Yeah, and I'm interested to see if these guys are planning on doing something similar to what Aberheat did. It looks like they're doing the exact same thing. They're just spam rooting the Tides Emissary in the back just to make sure that they can interrupt both of these Defilers. Very important, and they're also now using their Ursuls to knock them back as well. They're pretty much using every single mechanic they can to keep that Tides Emissary away from them so they can make sure they get these Defiler casts. That's really all you can do with that mob. You could maybe try to go in and, you know, insta-burst it down with DPS, but it has, you know, a couple million HP, which means you can't just instantly burst it. You're probably going to get a couple casts off from the Defilers. And one of the mechanics of the Defilers that we don't ever talk about because we always just see them interrupted is they have an ability that if it's channeled on you, you lose max HP and you lose damage. And if it stacks to 10, you just don't do any damage. Yeah. Which means you can't do anything. So you kind of can't go into that trash pack not being able to interrupt them.
Yeah, we see Pain for Femme just doing so well. They're an 80% trash here. They are engaging this Burkula Sanjay here a little bit later than 40k, but still quite a... You know, it's a substantial trash difference between those two teams. And Pain for Femme doing a really good job, really clean run so far. And it seems like their strategy throughout the dungeon has been a little bit more efficient compared to 40k, just because they have been faster. They're running the same comp, right? So if you're faster until this point, that just means your strategy has been more efficient. And there were some small differences, mainly in the Kragmaw room we've seen between those two teams. But now they're both at the same point. Now they're both on Burkula Sanjay. and they both need to deal with the last few trash percentages after this boss. Now we've seen Syzygy earlier having to backtrack quite a lot at the very end of the dungeon. I hope neither of those teams have to do so, because we all know backtracking is not something you want to do.
No, it's just inefficient in terms of movement. I believe Trekkie once said one of the teams was better at going where you wanted to go. And that's, it sounds, kind of silly to say, but that's just the truth. You want to be moving from the start of the dungeon to the end of the dungeon, and if you ever have to backtrack, you're just spending extra time moving. So, yeah, backtracking, bad. Moving forward, good. So, don't want to see any of that.
We see Pain for Femme actually pulling one of those Corruptors on top of the boss. So this is very dangerous, because those Corruptors, they have some very nasty casts, so you need to make sure to dodge. As you can see, those tentacles spawning, which after a couple of seconds they will do damage around them if you didn't move away. And then on top of that, the Corruptor also does a frontal, the maddening gaze. And if you stand in it, you will get a lot of damage, and you will also get feared. So having those abilities on top of also having to deal with Spore Color Sunshine, definitely a very difficult task they took upon themselves here on Pain for Fem's side.
Yeah, but again, it looks like something that's, maybe efficient for mob count, but it's taking them a lot of extra time to finish off this boss. They were only 10% behind on the boss compared to 40k, but 40k is almost halfway done with this trash pack already on the fortified setting. So, we see a lot of this. We talk about efficiency and pulling mobs with bosses, but this doesn't really look like it's ever worked out for either of these teams this entire series.
Yeah, you always think on paper it looks like something that is worth it, right? On paper it looks like, oh, if we pull this mob on top of the boss, then we get efficient timing on it. But if this mob prevents you from doing a lot of damage because you need to move out, because of the tentacles, you need to dodge, you need to pay attention to a lot of other things, which is not your rotation, right? Then you can definitely lose damage, and it might not be as efficient as it sounds, because not everyone is going to play perfectly if there's so many things that you need to take care of and pay attention to. So definitely something they need to consider for next time around, maybe not pulling this up on top of the boss here, as 40k is on 84% and Pain for Femme also 84%. They're both about to kill off these trash packs here, so they're very neck and neck on both sides.
Yeah, and just looking at the trash pack, it looks like Pain for Femme has dealt with this way better than 40k has. 40k is still dealing with the residual extra mobs they pulled, whereas Pain for Femme really only has that Corruptor left, plus a little bit of extra cleave on those Guardians, which they can just take care of with Blade Flurry. They're pulling an extra Defiler in, it looks like just for extra mob count, and I believe when they finish this, they'll be at just at 95% trash, which means they can kill off those last two Corruptors at the end for the rest of their mob count. So, perfectly figured out to the T for them. 40k, it looks like they need maybe one more mob after this trash pull, and then they'll be done. So, not quite perfect for them, but these guys are, they look pretty, like we said, 95%.
Yeah.
Looks like they've got it figured out.
You see, Lacelle actually getting hit by one of those maddening gazes, proccing the cheat death. So definitely got to watch out for that, as he does not have cheat death available for another 6 minutes for his side. As Pain for Femme, as you said, they are on their way to the two Corruptors here at the very end. They are going to be reaching 100% most likely after killing those two Corruptors, and then they still have their Bloodlust available for this last boss, which I'm not completely sure if it's really worth it to save for the last boss, because of course we don't have Reaping anymore. That gives you more efficiency, and it's a fortified setting, so the boss really maybe it would be better to use it somewhere else. But both of these teams, of course, agree that they have to save it for the last boss, so I'm probably wrong.
Yeah, this last boss is kind of dangerous, right? One of the biggest problems with this boss is if you're standing too close to the wall, one of the spores can just spawn right underneath you and just, on this difficulty, pretty much one-shot you. So as long as they're not doing that, you don't really need Bloodlust for this boss. But it's kind of just a safety thing. Sport-Colored Zancha, most of these groups aren't going to have any problems dealing with the mechanics on that boss. It's not a particularly difficult boss, I'd say. The final boss here, the Abomination, is definitely more difficult, so it's more of a safety play saving Bloodlust for this boss more than anything.
Yeah, and I'm just so surprised by Pain for Femme doing so well, because, we talked to Femme before, and he said that they were very confident in their strategies, and they can beat any team, basically, is what they said. But, for such a team to come in, because, of course, they participated the last time around as well, but they were not in the same team. You have Femme and Shelley in one team, and the other two were in another team, and you have one completely new player. So it's definitely interesting to see that they're doing this well on their very first map against 40k, because 40k were definitely the favorites to win this game, just because they're the veterans. They were doing way better than any of Pain for Femme's members in the first season. So seeing 40K struggle against Pain for Femme is surprising, really.
At this point, all we can really do is compare this team, well, as long as they don't wipe, right? Pain for Femme looks like they're doing fantastic in this dungeon so far. And all we can really do at this point is compare them to Abracadabra. I believe their time was in the low 16 minutes. Maybe Sierra will come up and verify exactly what the time was for us in a bit here. But they're on par here. I think one thing to remember about the Abomination is you don't actually deal any damage to the boss, you deal damage to his energy bar, and once his energy bar fills up, he spawns 2 of those blood visages. Every time you do that, you take a third of his HP off. So if you're new to the game or haven't done this dungeon, that's why the boss's HP isn't moving while they're hitting him. They only have 1 more energy bar to get through, then those final visages will spawn and the boss will go down for Pain for Femme.
Yeah, Pain for Femme doing such a good job, really. Such a clean run. 0 deaths, very efficient throughout, because if you look at 40K's side, they haven't been playing bad. They also have 0 deaths. So just Pain for Femme having a more efficient strategy throughout the dungeon, just being slightly faster, slightly more efficient. So really good job by Pain for Femme winning this first series against 40K.
Pain for Femme surpassing Dagor's expectations here. Really throwing her old guildmates under the bus. They take the series 2-0 onto that Underrot of a pretty close matchup there between the 2 teams. And this is going to show Pain for Femme's really showing up to play on this one, Sarah.
This was really close. Really close. I do just want to point out before we get into it, the 40K did a very clean run. This wasn't like Pain for Femme actually trashed them. They were competing. They were doing very well. Abra 16-20 time, very close to that. Let's have a look at some of the highlights here. So we're going to have 40K, who are going to be doing the same pull as Abra. Oh, I don't think we have the clip quite yet.
Give it a sec. It takes a little bit of time out of that.
There
one.
we go.
There we go.
Okay, so we see 40K doing the same pull as Abra at the beginning here. They don't do the ticks. They like to play it safe. They don't want to add in too much unnecessary risk. But they're showing that they can compete with them. That's what they want to be doing. Same thing as Pain for Femme. Moving into this trash room here, we see they're doing very similar routes here. See that enchanted emissary right at the back there. They're making sure that is nowhere near this pull. They don't want any of the interrupts going through, none of the screeches, decaying mine. They don't want the maggots not being able to be stunned. And this pull here, this is an identical mirror of the pull that Abra did. So when they say we want to be competing with them, we want to be doing the same things as them, they weren't streaming when they were doing this practice. So this is something that they've come up with, and it is matching exactly what they're doing. So they're doing very well here. Spore Collar Zancha going down slightly quicker for 40K. And at this point, it looked like, they both had 80% trash. It was neck and neck. It looked like it could be anyone's game. And then we got to the end, I don't know, 40K just at the top there on the final section. They just ran out of steam. They couldn't quite do it. Pain for Femme, very clean final boss here. Let's just give a little shout out to Miwa. They're doing a heck of a lot of damage, doing many numbers. Definitely. And they will take this game, as you say, take the series.
You like seeing your old teammates do well? Maybe Sierra was the problem?
Hold on a minute. Let's not go that far. You saw my paladin damage in Underrot.
It's only day 1 and they're already throwing him under the bus. But upper semis, Abracadabra and Pain for Femme, as you mentioned, Pain want to be able to meet up against Abra's level. They've talked about how confident they are. They're moving on into the series. 40K, a little bit later on, is going to be going up against Syzygy. So they've got a lot of time to be able to take a break, relax, start practicing up for the next matchup much later on into that one. But very cool to start seeing Femme advancing on this one, Dagor. Like I said, beyond your expectations.
I'm happy for them, but they were definitely not the favorites to win this because of the history, right? So that's the only thing I wanted to say. I do, of course, think Femme and Chalet are good players. I've played with them a lot. I like them. They're my friends. So I like them. I like seeing them succeed, but they were not the favorites to win here. Let's be honest. We're not going to lie here in this desk.
Of course. Sorry. Did you have something on that one?
Well, something I want to point out is I believe last season of MDI, Shelly was pretty new to Rogue, but he's been slamming on that thing for the past 4 months now. He's been playing his Rogue Shelly Snake on live a lot, so I know he's a lot more comfortable on it now than he used to be. So maybe it's just practice. Maybe that's all it is.
Just in time for the Rogue nerfs to be coming in. 3-4 days coming along.
Maybe we see him play the Warlock again then.
Well, I personally would love to see the Warlock. I know Zyronic would love to be able to see the Warlock, but pretty recently he was asking around about Death Knight, specifically asking Tegu quite a bit of Death Knight questions here, Zyronic. What do you think about that?
Shelly was asking Tegu Death Knight questions?
Yeah, the very same.
Weird.
I wouldn't say it was asking questions. It was more grilling him. It was more like an interview than
That's
it was,
true. That's
than it was
true.
a friendly conversation.
It's like, give me everything that you
I want
can.
to know
No.
the things immediately.
Teach me.
But that's how he is, and that's, the type of passion that he kind of brings into the table, and, you want to start expecting to see into the next matchup. Speaking of the next matchup, we got an NA versus NA battle between Method NA and Fly Me Out. So if you want to place your votes on that one, be sure to use the hashtags in chat right now, MNA or hashtag Fly, to place your vote. Pain for Femme moves on as they knock 40K down into that lower bracket off of the back of a couple simple mistakes on a 40K and a little bit cleaner play on the side of Pain for Femme. We'll be right back with the MDI right after this break.